In this video, we'll talk about atomic number and mass number and kind of just atoms in general, I guess. So atoms, you'll remember, are made up of a nucleus, which contains protons and neutrons. Protons are positively charged, and neutrons are neutral. Surrounding the nucleus are electrons, which are negatively charged. And just scale-wise, if the nucleus were about the size of a grape, the electrons would be spread out kind of in a mile radius around that. We have a few ways of describing atoms. So one of the first ones is the atomic number, which is often denoted as Z. And Z is the number of protons in the nucleus of the atom. So for example, if Z equals 2, it means that the atom has 2 protons in the nucleus. And it just so happens that we define elements by the number of protons they have. So this kind of says, what element are you? So if you have 3 protons, you're a certain element. If you have 4 protons, you're a different element. If you have 5 protons, you're a different element. Right? And this is how we kind of distinguish between different atoms. And so all atoms that have the same atomic number, which means they all have the same number of protons, are all the same element. But they can have different numbers of neutrons. So if you have a hydrogen atom, which has 1 proton, you can have a hydrogen atom of 1 proton and no neutrons, and also a hydrogen atom of 1 proton and 1 neutron. And they're both hydrogen atoms, but they are different isotopes, which just means that they have different numbers of neutrons. So the mass number becomes a really important part of describing atoms. And the mass number, which is denoted by A, is the number of protons plus neutrons. Which means that if you wanted to find the number of neutrons, it would be the mass number minus the atomic number. For example, here we have carbon, and so this C is the atomic symbol for the element of carbon. It's just a C, and you can look that up on the periodic table. In the upper left-hand corner, in the superscript, there's A, the mass number, and in the left subscript, there's Z, the atomic number. So we know that all atoms that have 6 protons in the nucleus are carbon atoms. This particular atom of carbon has a mass number of 12. Now that means it has to have 6 neutrons because it's got a total of 6 protons plus neutrons. I'm sorry, it's got a total of 12 protons plus neutrons. So if it has 6 protons, it must have 6 neutrons. Right? We can use the same technique to look at oxygen, oxygen 16. Oxygen 16 has 8 protons, like all oxygen atoms do, and it has 16 protons plus neutrons, which means it must have 8 neutrons, because 8 protons plus 8 neutrons would give you 16. Calcium 40 has 20 neutrons. Sodium 23 has 12. And the other thing I want to leave you guys with is the number of electrons. So for a neutral atom, the number of protons will equal the number of electrons. So for example, carbon, a neutral carbon atom will have 6 electrons, which will balance with the 6 protons. A neutral oxygen atom will have 8 electrons to balance with the 8 protons. Calcium will have 20 electrons, and sodium will have 11 electrons, if they are neutral. Now you can have different numbers of electrons, right? And that won't change what element you are. It'll just change you from a neutral atom to an ion. And an ion just means that you are charged. And to become charged, you need to have more protons than electrons or more electrons than protons. For example, if I had a carbon atom, actually let's not use carbon. If I have an oxygen atom, and I tell you that it has 10 electrons in it, you would know that since oxygen always has 8 protons, if it had 10 electrons, it would have 2 more electrons than protons, right? So it would actually have a -2 charge to it because it's got 2 extra electrons. If I had calcium and my calcium had 18 electrons, well, now I have 2 more protons than electrons. That would give me a charge of +2. For sodium, if I had sodium with 10 electrons, it would have 1 more proton than electron, which means it would have a +1 charge. And that's true for all the numbers. You could have +3, +2, whatever.